Oliver, you want to kick it off? I will
Sure.
keep working on the notes here.
Okay, great. So, hey, folks, thanks for waiting and surviving a Zoom bombing. We are in the May Linkerd community meeting. I think this is our third meeting in shelter in place. We're doing better than ever. We've been focused hard on the 2.8 release, which is coming up in about 2 weeks is the plan right now. So really focusing on getting these edges refined and stable. We have a big edge coming out tomorrow and maybe one early next week too. And that's really been, the main thrust of that work's been focused on multi-cluster, but there's been a bunch of other work across other features. So Thomas, what's your favorite non-multi-cluster feature in 2.8? Putting you on the spot.
Oh, well, the feature that I had all of my hopes and dreams set on didn't actually make. Sorry about that, folks. Okay. So the thing I think I'm most excited about is kind of all of the work that's happened with add-ons, because A, it's really set us up to do some awesome stuff, and B, I am super excited because we got Grafana as an optional component now. You don't have to install it. You don't have to go and remove it. And even cooler, you can use your own Grafana with links from the dashboard. And so not only can you just remove it, but the Linkerd dashboard continues to work. So that's kind of my favorite. I'm super excited about that one. Oliver, how about yourself?
Well, we've been working on 2.8 for so long. What are the things that got in earlier in the release cycle? We fixed a bunch of good proxy bugs. Even the last week, we've been chasing down some of these issues that have been reported. There's been some issues around ingresses that get misconfigured. So if you send traffic directly to the proxy and don't give it a valid name that it can route to, or that timed out for some reason, you can actually get stuck in a traffic loop. And we found this while testing the new multi-cluster gateway support, because we misconfigured it, but that actually created, we realized that we've seen this in a bunch of other issues and we're able to fix that. So that I think came out in the last Edge release, but we'll be improving that over the next few Edge releases to make it work well with the gateway. Yeah, I think I'm generally focused on a bunch of the quality things that we've kind of picked up along the way. Some good cache issues and timeout ton of things we fixed. So I'm hoping for many fewer proxy bugs in this release, bug reports. But if you find them, please keep them coming. And actually, that's one of the nice things about the multi-cluster feature is that basically no new proxy features were needed for one minor feature we added to do host header rewriting, but everything else is just controller side, and that's starting to look good. And I think we'll keep improving that after the stable release too. We have some plans for how to improve that to line up more with the policy stuff for 2.10.
We made a little change on the gateway side of things too, didn't we?
Oh, the stuff that's in flight right now, you mean?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so we started with a gateway that was just a simple Nginx TCP forwarding thing, but that doesn't allow us to do loop detection very well. And so it's pretty easy for you to set up two clusters that like loop the service traffic back between each other, and it's hard to detect at the just pure network level. So we have to add headers onto the requests so that the proxy can detect whether it's going back through itself. And that will also allow us to propagate identities to the application through gateways. So you can know what the client identity was, because we terminate MTLS at the gateway. So you have like the gateway you can think of as your other cluster's agent inside the cluster. So it gets identity from that cluster, et cetera.
Yeah, that I think is something I'm super excited about. I'm sure everyone is interested in the multi-cluster stuff. It's been really interesting for the multi-cluster stuff in particular to see kind of how all the pieces fit together. We've had quite a few conversations here, even in the last week, about how the UX works and what's confusing and what's not. And at least from my perspective, I've been learning how difficult it is to refer to two things. Remote and local don't work. East and west are okay.
Client and server don't work. Up
Client
and
and
down
server don't work.
Yeah.
We're on source and target now, which is all right. Hopefully that one's going to be our best one, but it's been interesting in particular to just figure out how to learn to talk about it.
Yeah, and on that side, I'm really curious about, like, we have some assumptions about the way folks use multi-cluster, but I get the sense that there aren't a lot of guidelines, especially when you think about how to create certificate authorities, integrate with cloud certificate authorities. So I'm really curious. We don't have a big group live right here, but I would love to get feedback from the community, maybe on GitHub, about how we can, how you're actually managing your credentials, or how you want to be managing your credentials or clusters.
That's a good call. I almost forgot to add that to the agenda. So I now added ask the community so we can ask that later on. I think so too. For the multi-cluster stuff, we kind of have addressed three major use cases at the moment. We have one that is failover. So a service dies in your local cluster, your source cluster, you want to fail over to a target cluster. One of them is what we're calling multi-tenancy. And the idea there is that you've got two clusters running completely different services. One good example would be a cluster that's in a high compliance zone, or simply clusters run by different teams. And then the third use case we're kind of talking about is the one I'm most excited about personally, which is development. And so you can set up a development environment where you develop on a Kubernetes cluster locally and just point to all of the staging resources that you need. And so to Oliver, to your point, I'm really interested to see how folks are going to use it. If we missed a use case or one of those is going to be the most heavily used one.
Yeah, I mean, everybody tells us they're running multiple Kubernetes clusters and want to connect them with the mesh, but no one really tells us why. So we have to kind of fit it together as we go.
And I think that's a good point.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm particularly, or we as a community are really excited to chat with folks through their multi-cluster. It isn't just the routing, it's actually, you know, chatting with y'all about trying to figure out what the best architecture is, because some of it isn't going to require Linkerd. It's going to be part of the larger community, which is always something that we've really enjoyed talking about.
Specifically, like, yeah, I think the space around certificates and you know, CAs, there's a lot of product out there, but there's not a lot of best practice or pattern.
Yeah, and it's like, it feels like the folks who spent the most time on this are the web scale companies, the Twitters, Facebooks, Googles of the world, and they've solved it in a very specific way that only really matters at their scale. And so it's going to be interesting learning the best practices that work at normal person scale instead of crazy scale.
Yeah, and I mean, there's not, we don't see a lot of Kerberos deployments in Kubernetes at this point.
Yes, indeed. Awesome. So let's move on to the, or Oliver, you have anything else on 2.8? Did we tell everybody what the date was for that?
No, we're targeting the 9th is the stable release date, and the next, every time you see an edge between now and then, it's getting closer to that. This one tomorrow should have some pretty big CLI changes that will expose all the multi-cluster stuff the way we want it to be exposed. And so we really appreciate it if you can take the time to either set it up in your own cloud environment, or we have some scripts that can spin it up in K3D if you want to run it locally, but just get your hands around it and tell us what you like, what you don't like. It might be a little late to change things for 2.8, but we'll definitely keep working on this after the stable release and improving it. So.
Yeah, and going back to my point earlier about it's actually been surprisingly difficult to explain how all of this fits together. Updates and help on the docs is insanely helpful because it is a little complex and there's a lot of moving parts. And so getting feedback on the best way to explain all of this is super duper valuable.
Does anyone want to like raise their hand or in chat and tell us what they want to do with multi-cluster and any like cool projects you want to do with multi-cluster? No, okay. We'll harass you about that later.
Yep. So why don't we jump into the next section, which is let's talk a little bit about summer projects. Charles, you want to jump on in?
Yeah. So thanks everybody for joining again today. We've got a few, well, you're all special guests, but we've got a few folks that we'd like to introduce to the community here. This is correct me if I'm wrong, Thomas, the second year that we've done GSOC?
This is the second year that we've done GSOC.
Okay, so.
In fact, Tarun is here, so we can point at him and say how awesome GSOC is.
That's right, we'll put him on the spot in a minute here. So there he is. So yeah, Tarun was part of the first cohort that went through GSOC with Linkerd, and this year we've got two students working with us, Mike and Ali. And so we want to give them a minute to introduce themselves. We'll also get an intro from Matei as well. So we'll just go, I don't know, let's see. Tarun, you want to add anything to that? Oh, let me, hold on, I got you on mute. There you go.
So I was the GSOC intern for last year. I mean, I definitely had a great time working with the Linkerd community and hope the current students have the similar experience too. So that's it on my side.
And the best part is Google pays for it all. So.
Honestly, I'm sure that everyone is going to say this, but it's a fantastic experience, at least for me, to be able to work with everyone. And I feel like it's been a great opportunity to get introduced to open source and really become part of the community. At least as a mentor, I've enjoyed it. I hope everyone else is going to say they enjoyed it too. But I've really enjoyed the mentoring side of it. It's been great to get the opportunity to work with folks and, you know, do it on open source so that it matters from a career perspective instead of getting your code sucked up by a needy corporation.
That's right. So with that, let's, Ali, would you like to introduce yourself to the community here?
Yeah, sure. Hello, everyone. My name is Ali. I'm from Indonesia. Currently, I'm studying Master in Software Engineering in Aachen, Germany. I love programming, basically. My favorite language currently is Ruby. I'm dealing with Ruby on Rails most of the time. I know that Linkerd is using Go and Rust mostly, and I also have an interest in Golang lately, so perfect place to start learning Go. Regarding my project with Linkerd, I'm a participant in Google Summer of Code this year, and I got a chance to work with Linkerd to make Linkerd supporting ARM architecture officially. The background, this project idea come from when I used to play with my Raspberry Pi cluster at home, and I'm trying to install Linkerd to learn about service mesh, basically cloud native stuff. But then I cannot install it out of the box at the time. I need to kind of like hacking around to make it work in my Raspberry Pi. And then, yeah, that's the reason I proposed this project to Linkerd. And so looking forward to work on this project with you guys and give some contribution to the community. That's all.
That's really awesome. Yeah, it's very cool. And it's interesting the number of companies that are interested in being able to deploy on this architecture, the ARM architecture, because edge computing is like becoming, I don't know, maybe it is already prolific, but I'm seeing more content being generated about it. So it's great. It's going to be fun to work on together for sure.
In particular, I feel like working on CI and the build scripts is the unsung heroes of a project. And I'm so glad that you're jumping in and helping out there in particular, because it's like the infrastructure that we all need to move faster and build awesome features.
And this also meshes pretty well with Mayank's project.
Mm-hmm. And on that segue, Mayank, would you like to introduce yourself to the community? Oh, let me unmute you. That's my fault. There you go.
Yeah. Hi. Thanks, Charles. Good day, everyone. My name is Mayank, and I'm from India. I am currently pursuing a bachelor's degree in computer science at Vellore Institute of Technology, which is located in the southern part of India. So a little bit about me. I enjoy working a lot with distributed systems and Kubernetes and anything that involves cloud native in general. And more recently, even service meshes. Big thanks to Linkerd for that. In fact, Linkerd was probably, I mean, not probably, definitely. Linkerd was the first, real community-driven open source project that I have contributed to. So the journey so far has been absolutely amazing, and I've learned a lot along the way from the community to finally land up in Summer of Code. So yeah, speaking about Summer of Code, we're going to be building a conformance validation tool, which basically checks if your cluster is configured correctly to work with Kubernetes. There's a check suite running currently, but yeah, there's a lot of blind spots in that, and those are static checks. So yeah, the conformance validation project is definitely going to help the community, and it's going to be awesome. So I'm really excited to see what lies ahead. So yeah, thanks once again, Team Linkerd.
Yeah, awesome. Well, yeah, we're excited to have you joining. And again, that's some of the unsung work that Thomas is talking about. Like, it's cool to make a fun feature or something that's like really well, very highly visible, but to do some of the behind the scenes work, that's just as crucial.
In particular, Kubernetes is getting more and more complex to the point where there's a bunch of error cases that new users run into with Linkerd that we can't test with check. Things like firewall rules between your API server and your kubelets. And this is going to make it so that you can actually test that and get better validation. And so it's all kind of part of the Linkerd ethos of making this something that doesn't poke you in the eye.
So good user experience. Yeah, that's great. Okay, and then thanks, Mike. And then now we have Matei. So I'll let you take it from here.
Thank you. So my name is Matei. I'm a recent graduate. Actually, this is my first week as a graduate. So experiencing the adult life officially. Thank you for the claps. Super excited to be here. I heard about the project first a year and a half ago when I was at my previous workplace as an intern. I made the fatal mistake of calling it Linkerd, got laughed out of the room. Fast forward a year and a half later, now a contributor, so very excited to be here. Just like everyone else here, my interests are around distributed systems, got a bit of a research interest around the optimization as well. So it's really nice for me to get to work on service topology. I'm going to be implementing support for the service topology feature, which was introduced in one of the latest versions of Kubernetes. So it's going to enable us to do some pretty cool stuff regarding priorities for services. I think I can learn a lot. I've already learned a lot from the feedback I got so far. So super excited to be here and work alongside the rest of you. And yeah, that's about it.
Thanks,
awesome.
man.
Yeah. Well, thanks for being here and being part of the community as well. So that does it for the introduction section. We're interested in, we're looking forward to working with you and reviewing PRs and working through code with you and all those fun things. So yeah. What's next, Thomas? Where are we going from here?
Linkerd Heroes is up next.
Oh, okay. Well, I certainly have a list of people who've been active in the community. And so to describe Linkerd Heroes, it's folks who have been making contributions. And again, this goes back to what we're talking about with people who are doing things behind the scenes or building features. It's members in the community who are highly active, helping other people out, you know, out of the goodness of their heart. For us, that makes a hero. So let's see. I've got a few on my list, Thomas. I don't think we have an actual process for saying who is a nominee and who we pick.
And nor do you win anything, so it's fine.
Yeah, that's right.
Since you started, I think you get to go first. Pick one.
Okay. Well, you know, I think he is an alumni, but Nassim, who's here today, has certainly, and this is fresh in my mind because I chatted with him yesterday. He's a hero to me because he has been doing very active in the community. And yesterday in our conversation, he said that he wants to submit a talk for KubeCon NA 2020. So whether that's a virtual event or in person, he wants to share his experience with Linkerd. So for me, that makes him an alum, a second-time hero, I believe.
He's also got a PR that he's been working on the proxy, which is serious business.
But
I want
most importantly, he's doing Slack support, which is the hardest job there is.
It's true.
I do want to point out what you just mentioned about KubeCon, which is we would absolutely love to help anyone who's interested in getting a talk into KubeCon. And so if you are interested in doing some brainstorming on talks to do, we're happy to go and work with you on the abstract. We're happy to go chat through what the sponsorship kind of requirements are. Reach out to us and chat. We would love to help you. And while selfishly we would prefer that it's Linkerd, let's be honest, it's more about KubeCon being awesome. And so reach out. We'd love to help out however we can.
And then we get contacted by all sorts of speaking engagements. So if you want to be talking about the things you're building or around Kubernetes, you know, we're happy to connect you. So just volunteer and we'll keep the invites coming.
All right, Oliver, I think it's your turn. Oh, no, sorry, Charles, I cut you off.
No, that's okay. I was going to say, if you this was a little more relevant when we weren't sheltered in place, but if you have opportunities to speak in your local area, I have a ton of content that I'm happy to share with you. And so,
and even better, your local time zone.
Yes, that's what I meant. That's what I meant. In your local time zone. So, but yeah, I'm happy to share slides and demos and things with you. So if you have a local community that you want to work with, just let me know. I'm on Slack and I will gladly share that stuff with you.
For me, let's see. I think for this week, this month, I'll call it Eliza Weissman, HawkW on GitHub, who's been doing a bunch of behind the scenes grinded out refactoring of the proxy. And I may have called this out in the last meeting just to talk about the work generally, but what we're doing, or I think we had Eliza here last time, right?
We did, yeah, and talking through everything that she's up to.
Yeah, so that work has been basically touching every single file in the proxy and changing it to use newer APIs. And it really has been a mountain of work. And she's been just trudging through it. And I did not think we would be in place to start testing this quite so soon, but it looks like it's gonna be able to land right after we cut the stable release, which was exactly the plan. So big props to Eliza for pursuing that and delivering.
Cool.
How about you, Thomas?
Great question. I'm going to call out Matej, and here's the reason why I'm going to call him out.
because he's next to you.
We have a RFC process that has been a little bumpy. We've been adopting it. It's been helping out. It's been great. All the summer code students have been through it. We kind of ask that if you're doing a project that you fill out the RFC. And Matei's RFC was basically one of the first ones I've seen where I had no comments. It was so well laid out that I just could read through it and go, oh, I understand everything and it works. And this all makes sense. And let me tell you how much of a breath of fresh air that was. In fact, Alex, another Linkerd community member, read through the RFC and said, yeah, this is good. I'm happy with it, which I don't think I've ever done anything for Alex that he's been happy with. So serious props. It was great to see.
This is because he's been doing homework recently. He's still in the mode. Wait a year or two and you'll forget.
Oliver, I'm definitely not going to show you what I did with my homework in school then.
I know my tech writing has gone downhill the longer I stay in the industry, but it is what it is. Good work, Matei. It's been awesome. All right.
Awesome.
So I think we have some time. We have plenty of time for questions. But is there anything we want to cover before that?
Well, I think we wanted to ask the community, and I know that you had your question of certificate management, but we probably could ask a couple others. So to do this, we'll ask a question. Please raise your hand if you'd like to give us an answer. It is in the participants section of Zoom if you haven't used that before. And if you raise your hand, we will come in and unmute and let you go. Though I think we may be able to turn the unmuting off. Either way, we'll ask the question, raise your hand.
Or just dump it in Slack or chat, not Slack.
So Oliver, what's the question? What's number one?
Okay, so my questions for the community are, what are you doing with multiple clusters? How are you using them for development, especially? Are you using them on your laptop? Are you trying to join clusters, or when are you trying to join clusters? That's kind of the big question, and I think there are the three hypotheses we had that Thomas said before. Developer use cases where you want to connect maybe your Docker desktop instance to your staging cluster to access services. Another use case might be multiple regions. So being able to say I have two mirrors of a topology of a cluster, and I'll have like either active or active passive and be able to route traffic between them if the service fails in one. Or I might do this for kind of a multi-tenancy and cost management thing where every team has their own cost center, gets their own clusters, and they have to use a uniform tech stack to communicate, but they all kind of operate their own instances and components for basically cost. Does any of that sound at all realistic to anyone in here? or which one of those would you do? It's a sleepy morning crowd, or on our coast, I guess. I think we're.
Oh, hold on. I see a raised hand.
Do we get a hand? Oh, Chris.
Yeah,
thank you.
Chris. Yeah.
Thank you, Chris.
Hey, I'll give a shot if no one
Great.
else wants to talk. So we don't use Kubernetes at all in development. So our actually security team has some requirements to isolate some services, but we still want connectivity. And the only tool that they have to use is VPCs. So we're deployed in AWS, and they say if this is a highly secure or just a component that's maybe using legacy interfaces, which are less secure, they don't want them together with other services. So we get asked to put them in separate VPCs, and then it's our job to figure out, okay, how do the services talk to each other? There's also a slight concern about blast radius. We have had a Kubernetes, we're using EKS, and we have had an EKS cluster just basically die on us, which makes me nervous. So in those cases, we
so you want some like redundancy and availability there?
Yeah, some redundancy would be great. So that's kind of the main thing.
And so when you're dealing with like the redundancy and availability aspects, are those, do you kind of want the manual ability to go switch traffic between clusters, or do you want that to happen all kind of out of your control? Like, what's the ideal user story there?
You mean it like, do I want to manually control how the traffic's flowing between the clusters? Like if I have
That's
redundancy
right, like,
across two clusters?
yeah,
Ideally, I wouldn't have to worry about that. It would just be kind of like turn on redundancy checkbox, you know.
okay.
I mean, you mentioned earlier the Kubernetes service topology feature. I haven't really looked at that, so that would be kind of interesting to look into. But yeah, haven't spent much
It's gonna
time
be
thinking
interesting to
about
see how these new Kubernetes features layer on to, like, we've done all the work in multi-cluster to try to just only make it services and don't do anything other than services and endpoints. So I hope that we'll have a easy story integrating with some of the newer Kubernetes features there. But I guess we'll figure out soon.
The other thing I'll say is that we're being asked to use a private link with AWS. I don't know if you're familiar with that feature.
Not yet.
It basically is kind of an alternative to VPC peering, where you can just expose a single service endpoint through an NLB.
Okay.
And so that's what we're trying to do instead of using VPC peering. So I'd be curious how the multi-cluster stuff for Linkerd works with that.
That's
Yeah, no,
kind of the reason we built it the way we did. Is like,
Yeah.
you don't need to have a flat network, and so you can just expose a load balancer and you're set.
Right on. Yeah, I'll have to give it a shot once it comes out.
And so while we're talking through this, do you, like, when you provision your Kubernetes clusters, are you like thinking about the kind of certificates that you give them? Are you thinking about a central CA and delegating like sub-signing intermediaries, or is that kind of all like a black box AWS thing?
We do use our own CA to vend certs. I've kind of split it out into two layers right now. We have the kind of the AWS networking layer where we're using certificates that we put into the IAM store. And then we have the Linkerd stuff where we just started using Cert Manager yesterday. And so we're doing kind of all the internal stuff separate from the external stuff. I'd be curious best practices here, if there's a reason to use maybe a single CA across everything, or if that makes sense to do. But right now it's
this is suddenly cool. Yeah, I don't think there's necessarily, some organizations have reasons to use them across Kubernetes and Linkerd, for instance, but for us, we're now starting to think through the kind of, when you have multiple clusters, do you want to use a single trust root for multiple clusters and kind of have subdomains and issuers, or do you want to have totally independent trust roots and then just share the trust roots between clusters? And there's various ways to set this up, but we don't know what the exactly right, balance of those features is.
Yeah, I can say that how we have it set up today is working perfect for us. So I don't have any issues with it. I like having the separate, having Linkerd manage, well, actually, I guess it's Cert Manager manage that for us now. So
cool.
And then the bridge is just done with the public search that we use for other use cases as well.
Do you give your clusters, do folks give their clusters different names, domains, or are they all cluster.local?
I think we just use cluster.local for everything. I didn't even know there was another option.
Yeah, I mean,
There isn't, don't do it.
Okay, I won't.
But yeah, Thomas isn't wrong, but from the identity perspective, we're starting to think through how do we talk about, if I have the same service in multiple clusters, they should have distinct identities. They're not the same exact service account. So we have to start thinking about addressability in that scope. So that's why I bring that up. That's all I had. Thomas, do you have any questions?
No, I think those are kind of the big ones on the top of my mind right now. Is basically we've made a bunch of assumptions on the multi-cluster side of things, and we're going to have to figure out how it fits into the bigger picture.
So yeah, please keep feedback coming as you test it more.
All right. think that's good for asking us questions, or us asking you questions. Finally, it is Stump the Maintainer. Charles, do you want to moderate this one?
Yeah, for sure. So Stump the Maintainer, if you haven't joined us for this this meeting before, is you get to ask anybody here, or Thomas and Oliver, but anybody who's a maintainer who's here, about a question that you think might be, that you might find challenging, or that maybe will help the community to understand Linkerd better. But yeah, really anything that just seems like a difficult question or really deep down in the weeds, very technical, this is your chance to ask that question and pick the brains of the brilliant people who are designing and working through the architecture of Linkerd. So I see Nassim's got his hand up already. We can start there, and then we'll go with anybody else who has questions. There
Hi.
you go.
So,
Hello, Nassim.
hello. I was wondering if a cluster can see itself as cluster.local, but other clusters see it as cluster.west or whatever. Is that possible? Is that a thing? And that's not a Linkerd specific question, but it kind of, makes me think about multi-cluster.
You can, I mean, it's DNS for sure, right? If you want to go to the DNS route, you can definitely make that work. For multi-cluster, for Linkerd, what we do is we put the cluster name in the service name, and we basically take every service in the other cluster and create a copy of it in the local cluster in the exact same namespace with a slightly different name, so you can address it. And so then we use traffic split to do that transparently.
Could services across many clusters all be under cluster.local if their service names were different?
Yeah, I mean, it's with it, like, because we create services in each cluster for the other clusters, everything is resolved within the context of the local cluster, right? So everything being cluster.local is actually fine. You don't need global service addressability because we create new services instead of that, right? But we still have this problem with the identities, which aren't exactly the same as the pods of the services, right? So it's not actually tied to the cluster domain, but we use the cluster domain as the default identity domain.
Okay, and like TLDR, who uses cluster domains? Who configures cluster domains and why? Like, what's the common use case for that?
Thomas has a snarky answer for this.
It is a configuration option exposed by kubeadm, and it is folks use it to be able to kind of understand what cluster they're working in. It is
I have
awful and breaks half of the ecosystem.
Okay, good to know. I've never thought twice about it except for now. So
I think there's a more plausible, slightly more plausible reason is that in organizations like large internet companies I've worked at in the past, they'll have kind of a very rigorous DNS scheme for things, and they want everything to be in yahooinc.com if you're at Yahoo.
Gotcha.
And that way the DNS recursion can fall back to the roots for the company, and they can make sure that they intercept all DNS requests under their domain rather than getting forwarded to other domains.
I see. One last one that kind of ties in with multi-cluster. So we're using Store Manager today. Our Trust Anchor exists as a secret in Kubernetes. When I want to start doing multi-cluster, I understand that all the Linkerd installations across the clusters have to share the same Trust Anchor, right?
Yep. So I can anticipate your question. There are two options. The first option is that you can just grab all the trust roots for all the clusters and upgrade all the clusters to have that new trust root. And then when the gateways get rolled, they'll have all of the trust roots and they'll be able to establish identity, and it will be okay. That's a good way to do it post hoc. The best way, I think, would be to create an offline trust root, like an offline CA key, right? And use that to create issuing certs that you give to all the other clusters. That way you can keep that one offline trust root distributed to all your clusters. and create new issuers off of that thing without having to upgrade everything. But it's not, it doesn't have to be that kind of thing if you have an incremental, if you already have a setup. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, well, it filled in most of the gaps. There's like one small little gap that's left. What I want to ask was, if you deploy that same secret in all the clusters, the trust anchor, key cert secret in all the clusters, is that kind of like having the same trust anchor?
Yeah. In fact, Thomas's first version of that did that, and I went, ugh. But it's no, it's totally fine. It's just impure, and
it's impure, but it works. But it's just like defeats the purpose of some, like, basically one trust group for all your clusters is kind of a anti-pattern or something.
You want to limit the scope and lifetime of any key. Any private key material should have the shortest life and breadth possible, right? And so in the pods, we have it in the pod and we refresh it every day. At the cluster level, you'd like that to be refreshed every month or quarter or something, right?
The thing is, it's a pain in the butt, the trust anchor one. That's why some companies may or may not give it a 10-year lifespan. But so that's why anyways, I think that answers my question. So I could, if I wanted to, deploy that same one secret in all the clusters and they'd all trust each other.
Okay, that'd be fine.
The trust anchor also can be a bundle of certs. And so you can have 2 different trust anchors in 2 different clusters, or 2 different actual PEMs or certs that you create a trust anchor out of, a bundle of them. And you could do it that way as well. But to Oliver's point, the general idea is what you want to do is minimize the risk when someone steals the secret. And if you've got one across all your clusters, that means if someone hoses one of your clusters, they get access to all of your clusters. And so by having one per cluster, it's more secure that way.
And that's even worse if it's a long lifetime. So if that's a 10-year cert, then that means for the next 10 years, they can come and impersonate that issuer unless you have a way to invalidate that, which means replacing your trust groups.
But it's safer to have just one offline, you're saying, than rather have one of the same in multiple clusters. It's one compromise away, right? It's one compromise away. Rather than one compromise offline, one compromise in one of the clusters, it's one compromise away.
Yeah, so like if you have a single trust root, you want to like put that in a safety deposit box and whatever. But I think it's also fine to deal with multiple issuers, and I think where most folks go is to use a cloud provider based issuer or HashiCorp Vault or one of these other systems basically as the root, and then they use that to issue issuers.
That could be a good blog post. That could be a good blog post. You could do it this way, you could do it that way, you could do it that way. These are the pitfalls. You could replicate the secret in all the clusters technically, but Oliver does not approve, etc., etc. Anyways, thank you.
Help us write that blog post, please. We put it up on Linkerd.
Sounds good.
All right.
Great question.
Thank you,
Great
Nassim.
question.
Yeah, really good question. Anytime a conversation flows like that, to me, it means it was a good question. So I think we've got time for one more question, and Chris has already got his hand up. He's been waiting patiently, so we'll fire away, Chris.
I think this comes up from before.
I'll try to be as quick as possible, and I apologize if I've asked this before, but I don't remember the answer. BPF versus IP tables. Is there any thoughts about that long term? I have talked mostly with some of the Cilium guys that they say that if you're doing sort of trust security stuff, IP tables isn't really secure. So just curious what your thoughts are.
That sounds like what the BPF vendor would say, but I mean, like, I think that, well, one, as I understand, newer kernel versions switch the implementation of IP tables to be BPF under the hood in newer versions anyway. This is not my
configurable. It's configurable. It's not happened yet, but the backend has been switched over to that, or you can configure the kernel in that way. So give it 2 years and you'll see that in your Red Hat kernel of choice. Debian latest is using NF tables though, which is already faster than the naive IP tables implementation.
But like from the Linkerd project perspective, we actually would prefer that there was a general way for doing injection that was kind of mesh agnostic, or part of SMI, because it's really not part of the core value prop. It's like how you configure your Kubernetes cluster. It's more of a CNI feature. And so we have the Linkerd CNI, but there's like really nothing Linkerd specific about it. So if it's better to do BPF, we would definitely help folks wrangle a project to do the init containers via BPF. But
I actually looked into it quite a bit, and BPF at the moment is very low level. You end up writing a bunch of really buggy C code. And so I took a couple steps back from that. I'm not sure it actually makes a ton of sense outside of what's happening in the kernels underneath the covers for IP tables right now. If the only thing you're doing is redirects, if you're doing something else, like the Cilium folks do a lot of really awesome stuff in eBPF, I think that makes a lot more sense.
I bet we could do it in Rust though.
And then cross compile it to C?
It's FFI, it's fine.
I've heard that the folks over at Falco are doing quite a bit of work with eBPF as well. So yeah, if you have more questions, I think there are plenty of resources online where you can get that info, but it is also my understanding that it can be a little bit difficult to work with to get the same value that you're getting out of IP tables. So yeah, that is awesome.
And if you learn anything along the way, definitely share it with the community, put a discussion up on the GitHub. By the way, if you haven't seen, we have discussions on GitHub now. It's like issues, but 1,000 times better for actually having conversations. So definitely chime in there if you find stuff like this.
Yep. Okay. So we're coming up on the top of the hour. Really want to thank everybody for joining, for your questions. Thomas and Oliver, I'll leave it up to you for last comments. And before that, I want to say thanks to Matej and Ali and Mayank and everybody who participated. So thanks for making this an awesome monthly community meeting, and we will see you online, and we'll see you at the next community meeting.
I think
thanks, everybody.
Yeah, great rest of your day, everybody.
Keep the feedback coming, and we'll have some great new features for you in a couple weeks. But good to see everybody.
Yeah, thanks a lot.